call for any apologies. I have one from Deputy Chair Halale, who may be running slightly late, but should get here soon. We have a mover, Tim, a seconder. Councillor Ryan, thank you very much. I'll put that to the meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? It's carried. Agenda item 2, declaration of interest. Can I ask if any members wish to declare a declaration of interest? If not, we'll move on. Before I go on to the next item, I just wanted to note that there is only one public excluded agenda item in today's meeting, and that relates to the confirmation of last month's public excluded minutes. So I propose that if no members wish to speak to those publicly excluded minutes, then we'll bring it forward as a new agenda item 3.2 in the public session. Does anybody wish to speak to the public excluded minutes from the last meeting? No? Excellent. Then I can therefore confirm that the public excluded minutes of the previous meeting can now be confirmed as new public agenda item 3.2. And so on that basis, we'll now go back to 3.1, and that is a review of the previous meeting minutes, public minutes. Can I call for any errors, omissions or amendments? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's one on page 11. The last paragraph on that page reads as follows. The meeting heard that one of the major discussion points for the upcoming LTP process would be how much should council do and spent on trying, and spent should be spent.
Excellent. Any additional comments or feedback? The governance advisor has asked if you could please email that comment to her.
Oh, sorry. It takes about 15 minutes to try and explain something like that through an email. I've got a lot of other things I have to do. This is the most time efficient way for me to do it.
Okay.
I have repeatedly asked to have access to a printer. If I could print a page out and give it to the governance advisor, that would be time efficient as well. Emailing is not.
Okay,
so
what I'll do from here is I will take an action to take this offline. I will resolve it between us. Thank you very much. Are there any other errors, omissions or amendments to the minutes? If not, could I please ask somebody to move them?
Well,
with that amendment, Councillor Ryan move, seconder. Over seconder, Councillor McCone, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. Now, with regard to the remainder of the meeting, I've made the decision just to mix it up a little bit and shift some of the agenda items around. Oh, sorry, 3.2. That is acceptance of the publicly excluded minutes as well. All those in favour? Sorry, can I have a mover? Councillor Black, we can have a seconder. Councillor Hopkins, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you very much. That's motion carried. So again, my apologies. Just moving on to the remainder of the items, specifically agenda item 4 and 5. I've just taken the liberty of shifting these around a little bit so that we can focus early on the procurement and risk updates. And so I'd like now to move to agenda item 5.3, the procurement update. And I invite Mr. Hope to introduce it and Ms. Lyons to speak to it.
Thank you. I think we'll just go straight to Ms. Lyons on this one.
Thank you. So this is the first procurement update that has been provided to this committee. The overview provided is of 3 months, June, July and August this year, the procurement activities that took place within those months. So these were contract awards. So this doesn't account for ongoing procurement activity where contracts have not yet been awarded or where we are paying suppliers for contracts that were previously awarded. The vast majority of the 16.3 492 million that was spent was a $10 million contract, which was approved by council for the remediation of vulnerable landfills. The rest all falls within what is to be expected within those months, and the split between standard and non-standard procurement approaches is 29 standard and 15 non-standard. So there's non-standard methods where either direct engagement or where people have obtained 2 quotes rather than 3. So for both of those methods, additional approval had to be obtained prior to using those. We are undertaking some spot checking on procurements that have taken place in recent months. So that process is underway, and we've requested details from procuring officers of 4 procurements that took place over the last 6 months. And those will be reviewed to ensure that the policy requirements were met. And if there are any areas for improvement, we'll be able to identify those and feed those back. A very important point to note in this report is the amendment to the Construction Contracts Act. That comes into force on the 5th of October and does have some implications for how we manage contracts within council. So I've been working with finance to ensure that we've got a process in place there. And so the finance team is working on ensuring that we can report appropriately, and a contracts register is being set up so that we've got a centralised location for all contracts to be held. These amendments are being governed by some serious fines for failure to adhere. That is being monitored by MB, and those fines are up to $200,000 per organisation per instance of non-adherence, and up to $50,000 per executive per instance of non-adherence. And those instances would be per contract. So if we failed to report, say, 1 quarter on multiple contracts, those fines could easily rack up to significant amounts. Obviously, we will endeavour not to have any such issues. Some staff attended procurement training last week in Dunedin that was hosted by a procurement officer from MB, and the feedback so far has been really good. It was a really good session, and I think people came away with confidence that actually we're doing things really well and as we should be here. And that's it, other than any questions.
Councillor McKine.
Yeah, could you just please expand on what the 2.9 million was for parks?
That included the maintenance contract renewal that was brought to council, so that increased the cost of those. I couldn't speak to the other 2 specifically, but I can find that out if you'd like to know.
No, that's fine. And that's annual, or that's a 3-year term?
That was the total contract cost within that total amount for parks there.
Yeah, but is it for this 12 months, or is it for a longer term than 12 months?
Yeah, that was the 12-month extension to the existing park contract that came through council. So that is an annual amount, makes up the majority of that 2.9.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. This may well be a Buffhead's question, but I'm looking at this and it doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm wondering if members of the community reading it would feel the same way. We see that we're showing here a number of below $10,000 procurements, standard or non-standard. There's 26 such procurements shown in waters, which if they're under 10 grand should in theory equal 260,000. Instead, they equal 2,455,539. We've only got 3 sub 10k procurements for parts, but 2971256.
Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, just to confirm, these are greater than 10,000, not sub 10,000.
Oh, sorry, I was reading the arrow the wrong way. Okay, yes, thank you. That explains why the question, I did say it might be a bookhead question.
No, not at all, not at all. It's the old, it's the old.
Sorry, I was reading,
Crocodile
I read
mouth.
it as sub-tier, not over-tier. Okay, problem solved. Thank you.
Excellent. One thing worth pointing out, when I was reading this last night, I couldn't get the numbers to add up to 16 million, but it was pointed out to me this morning that the cents are missing off the solid waste line, and so that should move a couple over. And so that is in fact $10.144 million in there. A question that I have, and maybe it's useful while we've got Amanda here as well, just around the risk around the construction contract amendments and us ring fencing that cash. Are we really confident that we've got the risk associated with this amendment nailed?
Yep, between us, we've come up with a new process. We're going to have a separate bank account and a separate email address. So when people are sending, when we sign up, anyone at any department signs up to a new contract, that contract and everything we need to know will be sent to a separate email address. So we'll have all the records in one spot, and then a separate bank account will be reconciled monthly so that we will always know what retentions we hold for each contract.
Excellent, thank you. And the other question that I had was just around the policy adherence reviews. So I remember, I think last time you presented an updated procurement policy, we talked about having relatively regular reporting on policy adherence and exceptions to policy, and we'd start to track whether there were certain areas that had greater breaches or not. I assume that because it's just still so young at the moment that we're working through that, and that we'll start to see those happening more frequently.
That's right. Yeah, we'll see that increase and improve, and we'll learn from what we find in these reviews and adapt, so that hopefully we can bring back some good information.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to confirm that as being partly responsible for the solid waste procurement, which is the largest one on there, we did have the services of the procurement advisor as an observer on the procurement process, and also an independent probity advisor as well, to ensure that significant acquisition was taken through correctly.
Thank you very much. That's valuable clarity. So are there any other questions around the procurement update? Councillor Blackman.
Thank you. I just had a question around what's the criteria around how we go about the selection of various settings that you guys have conducted the compliance review on, and why have we selected greater than $10,000 as the kind of capture point?
So in terms of how we've decided on which procurements to spot check, we pulled a report of procurements that have taken place and reviewed those for what would have been expected. So whether it would have been a tender or whether that would have been expected to go through the quotation process. And from that picked a set of recent ones that spanned across the assets department. So going forward, we'll obviously include other departments as well, but given that that's the main group that does large scale procurements, that's how we chose those. And the $10,000 limit is because the procurement policy allows anything under $10,000 to follow the purchasing procedures. So a direct engagement would be allowed within that, and that would include any kind of purchasing rather than going through a full procurement process.
Thank you. Councillor McCone.
So just the point being, that's a 3-month snapshot, I assume. How much of that is actually capital expenditure and how much is business as usual? And the point being, where are we sitting at with what we've budgeted for in our long-term plan or our annual plan, as opposed to what we've actually spent to date?
I mean, that's something we could try and combine into this, but in terms of, I think the financial update does provide that kind of breakdown. We just don't have the relationship between the procurement and the spend, and obviously, there can be quite a lag between when we actually make the procurement decision and the actual spend. So, yes, I can see the value in combining the two. We just need to have a think about what's actually the best way to provide, to capture that information and then supply it to you in a way that's actually meaningful. So, possibly the thing that springs to mind would be, once we get a bit further through this, being clearer about sort of the procurement amounts and then the final spend on a major contract or something like that. And then, so it might be, here's what we procured, here's the spend patterns that we expected versus perhaps what we actually experienced, and then explanation of variance at the end. But now that we've made this start, I think that's the kind of thing that we'll look to develop to provide a bit of nuance and greater clarity.
Thank you. Yeah, I think looking through this, obviously there's some, as we mature and as we get more coming through with the new policy, we'll be able to create some new metrics that will be quite, I mean, even looking at the standard versus non-standard procurements for the 3 months that we've had to date, it looks like the lion's share of them outside of property are all pretty standard. And so, property would be the one that I would be wanting to kind of get more of an understanding about, should you see that kind of pattern continue over time.
I mean, we could also look to break down, we know that some it's like a direct council decision to approve it. Some it's like there's actually only been 2 viable suppliers. So we could provide a wee bit more breakdown of the non-standard and which sort of category they fall into, I think, quite easily.
Yeah, I think, where material and where useful is something that'll be worthwhile developing. But look, thank you. I think that it's a really good update. Are there any further questions or comments on the procurement update? If not, could I please ask for somebody to move? Councillor Hopkins to second, Councillor McCone. All those in favour? Against? It's motion carried. Thank you. And now we're going to, whilst Ms. Lyons has the mic, move on to 5.2, the risk management update. Welcome, Deputy Chair Halale.
Thank you. So the risk management update this time, I will speak to the attachments. So the first attachment starts on page 36 and just gives an overview of the key risk position and operational risks this quarter. In the heat maps, you'll see that whilst things are moving from inherent to residual, slightly in a better position, we are seeing that more of those risks are sitting still in that very high red area. So to skip onto the attachment of new and changed key risks, that's on page 43, we've actually seen an increase in credit risk failure by a borrowing entity. That risk has increased from high to very high this quarter, and the new risk district development is also very high. So that takes us from 1 very high risk to 3 this quarter. The other 2 increases were in joint and several liability, which has remained as high, but just a slightly higher high, and political uncertainty, which we anticipated would increase as we move towards the general election. So that's moved from medium to high this quarter. The additional risks, of which there are 4, were all discussed and debated by ELT and operations managers, and we added those and represented the current risk that they face at the moment. Is there a question before I continue?
Thank you. So just before I invite questions, just a point of clarification. So one thing I noted before the meeting today, and I raised with Mr. Hope and Ms. Lyons, was if we look at the credit risk credit risk failure by a borrowing entity. And if you look on the left-hand side of the table on page 43 and the right-hand side of the table on page 43, so that's the underlying risk and then the residual risk after some treatment, you'll see that the inherent risk has increased from 3 to 4. That's in fact just an error. They should both be at 4, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So it would be a real red flag for me if I saw that after treatment the risk had increased. So that's good to know that that is simply a punching in error. But I am keen to understand a little bit more why we have seen that increase in credit risk associated by a borrowing party. I know, Mr. Hope, we talk on page 34 of the pack about increased risk associated with economic difficulties globally and nationally, but wondering whether you could perhaps elaborate on that a little bit for the members.
Yes, certainly. This is really reflecting that I think the pressures that the agricultural sector are facing at the moment. It's a changing regulatory environment. The announcements from Fonterra about a likely drop in income over the next 12 months, and on the sector is also facing quite significant cost increases. So we really just looked across the situation. We do have a high level of exposure to the sector, and we just believed it was time to adjust that factor, because it's certainly with the boards of the 2 irrigation companies we are lending to are also very aware of the situation that their shareholder customers are facing. They are doing all they can to minimise cost increases in the near future and to increase share sales. I know in particular that North Otago Irrigation Company Limited has a share offer out at the moment, but we're still waiting for the results of that. So it really was just an assessment that across this quarter, the risks had increased. There is as the table indicates, a limited amount that council can do to actually mitigate that risk, other than talk to the boards whenever we can about the progress they're making. But it is a very challenging environment for the sector at the moment, and we just needed to reflect that in the risk that we're facing.
Thank you. And so I am expecting that we'll keep a close eye on that, and you will bring it to our attentions. I guess it's all increasingly concerning when we're looking at NOIC's change in interest rates later in the piece as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the biggest mitigation is for them to have a successful share offering, which the closer they get to being fully subscribed and therefore sharing the cost, reasonably significant fixed costs across a greater number of shares will certainly help mitigate their situation.
Are there any other questions, Councillor McKeown?
Just again on page 34, it says your operational risks and volunteer management was added and increases risks. Could you explain a little bit more on that, please?
So this key risk was added as a result of discussions that happened through the operational risk process. And as we identified the departmental operational risks, there were a few of the public facing departments who utilise volunteers, who raised the fact that we probably need some additional consistency around our management of volunteers. So we've got some new controls identified to implement a new policy around that and ensure that we are consistent in our approach to management of volunteers, and that due to the fact it was more than one department that's utilising volunteers and we need a whole organisational view of this, was added to the key risk register.
So to provide a little more clarity, because I also spoke to this earlier on, an example of this is we have, as a council, there are significant entities that we're responsible for, where we have a lot of publicly facing volunteers who effectively are representing the council in their roles. There are several of those functions where there's no police check performed whatsoever. Yeah. Excellent. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Paul, for the full and helpful explanation regarding the credit risk failure. I'd like to ask a question, just a bit more detailed about the volunteers in a moment as well. But I'm interested, on page 39, we've got the district development risk that you've added. And it reads that district economic and social wellbeing outcomes are not achieved due to non-adherence to defined strategies, poor planning, or ineffective relationship management, resulting in lower district wellbeing and community satisfaction. My view is we should add to that one of the risks of district economic and social wellbeing outcomes not being achieved should include external impositions that impose time and cost constraints on us. In other words, all the statutory stuff we have to deal with that we don't necessarily want to. I know you're looking at risks internally, but to me, that external imposition does create internal risks as well, and I think it should be added. Do you have a view on that?
I think we could look at that and discuss with ELT in terms of whether they see that as a cause of that risk occurring. I would hope that any external sort of changes to legislation or anything like that would support the district development, but obviously that might not be the case.
And just so volunteers, you talked about lack of consistency, and we've had one example from the chair, the lack of police checks. What are the key inconsistencies that you've identified as risks? And just sorry, while we're at it, can you explain a little bit more about the joint and several liability risk, i.e. the judgment made against council related to a final code of conduct sign-off, please?
So in terms of the consistency for volunteer management, because there is no consistent approach at the moment, there may be differences in how people are onboarded and what kind of training that they're given. And obviously when we're talking about public facing areas, so say the gallery or museum, for example, we want to ensure that people who do go into those spaces receive the same treatment and get the same information from each volunteer that they may enact with. In terms of joint and several liability, I will pass over to Mr. Cook, who can give you a good overview of that.
So as Councillor Hopkins will be aware, under the Building Act, the joint and several liability eventually falls with the council. We run a tight ship in WDC. However, across the landscape where we view ourselves and other BCAs, there are it seems to be increasingly findings in the joint and several liability, and this will come inevitably as construction companies become financially stretched and can't make any claim obligations. The dear council is left as the last man standing in every case. I'm pleased to report that we don't have any situations at the moment, but we feel that just that the landscape is changing quite significantly.
Thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Sorry, it's a bit pedantic this one, but right at the top is climate change, and it's very high. And can we change that wording, because it's you're not going to change nature, and climate change to me is something that is not proven. Whereas we know that if we have a climatic event, which could be a flood, wind, whatever it is, that's something we can't control, and this is something we can.
So I'd counter that by saying that the risk register that we've got here and that's being developed and maintained is not a risk register about risks that we can control. It's a register about risks, full stop. And I would argue that whether you're a skeptic or a believer in climate change, there is absolutely no doubt that we are living in a more volatile climate now that has a significant impact on the assets that these guys are managing, and you've only got to have spent the weekend in Queenstown to see that.
Yeah, again, we'll agree to disagree, but we'll leave it there.
I think the point that I was trying to make there primarily, though, Councillor McCone, is that the risk register is not about risks that we can manage. It's about risks, full stop. However, on that note, and whilst I have the microphone, I would like to point out that when we talk about out of appetite operational risks on page 34, there's a reference made to a risk being accepted, and details of it are provided in attachment 4. Attachment 4 defines the out of appetite commentary, and the risk being accepted is that this risk has been accepted as the fast pace of change to an increasing issue and will likely remain after the general election. I don't think that that's a reason for us to accept the risk. The reason that we're accepting this risk is, to Councillor McCone's point before, it's something that we can't manage. And so if it's a risk that we genuinely can't manage, I'd rather that it was reflected as exactly that in the text, if that's doable, please.
Yeah, certainly.
Any other questions or comments? No, if not, then could I please ask for somebody to move that we accept the risk register? Councillor Cone, seconded. Councillor Ryan, thank you. So now I'll ask all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's motion carried. Thank you very much. And we'll now move back to agenda item 4, which is the Treasury strategy. And I ask Mr. Hope to introduce that, please.
Thanks.
Mrs. Nichols might add some pieces onto this, but I mean, this is a report that, well, is something that is required under the Treasury policy. It's another one that's sort of showing its age, and there are a number of improvements we are thinking about. However, we'd like to just get through a bit further through the initial discussions in relation to the financial strategy that will be developed for the long-term plan. And then really once we do that, we'll have clearer direction about what kind of more useful information can be supplied in this in this sort of the strategy adoption for each quarter. Yeah, I think in particular, sort of having a longer term view of the debt position and the likely debt that we're going to raise, and a few other features like that. So it does meet the requirements of the policy, but it is something that we accept can be improved. But further discussions and questions will be helpful in sort of developing our thinking in that area. But Amanda, anything you'd like to add?
No, not too much. I just wanted to point out that we're in a good position. Cash requirements are pretty steady, but we have almost 5 million sitting on call and have spread a couple of mil over some term deposits. One's just matured recently and another one October. We haven't needed to require any more drawdowns from our GFA so far this year, but that will happen shortly. And as far as investing funds to external entities, they're all on market rates now, with the exception of NOIC, which will take effect from 1 January. Also to note, the report itself is to 31 August, but the Bancorp report attached is for 30 June. So you'll notice some different debt numbers. That's why.
Thank you. Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. Page 16, loans to external parties. I just see that Oamaru Whitestone Civic Trust is missing from that, and I just wondered where that loan's sitting and what interest rate that's being charged at.
There's no interest on it. It's interest free.
Oamaru Whitestone Civic Trust.
Microphones, please.
Sorry, can we just get some clarity around that?
So the Whitestone Civic Trust is being charged an interest rate, but we've also granted $21,000 to them as a credit towards that. My understanding is that they've actually made used that $21,000 and made a capital reduction in the loan. And I think the concern is that the actual interest rate is over 10%, which seems very high, given most interest rates. And it's certainly something that's causing some concern for the trust, but also I think, you know, we're supposed to be in a partnership with the Civic Trust, and that's a bit of a punitive one compared to a lot of the rates, and we perhaps need to look at the basis for that interest rate. Slightly different topic, but conversation needs to be had.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to that at all?
No, I think that's covered the situation well.
Excellent, thank you. A couple of comments from me. I appreciate that we're still developing the new metrics and new reporting structure, but one thing I wouldn't like to see missed off for too much longer is what our weighted average cost of capital is for the debt that we've incurred. And I'd also like to see the weighted average return on our loans. Those are two pretty important numbers that I'd quite like to see reported as soon as possible, please. And I guess I also mentioned I'd like to keep a watching brief on, so given bullet point 2 on page 16, where we've got NOIC sitting at 3.26%, adjusting in December, I'd expect to see that going up in a pretty sharp way, off the basis of our discussions before about increasingly risky environments. I just think that that's something that I'd like to keep a real watching brief on with you over the course of the next month or two. Further questions, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll share your views on that matter that you've just raised. If I may, some additional questions on page 17. I'm just curious, you mentioned that we've had some money on term deposit. There's also a reference on that page to the fact that banks are offering 5.95% for 12 months. Do we have any money on deposit for 12 months? And if so, how much?
No, we don't currently have any on 12 months.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify that, remember we've talked about this a little bit before, and whilst sometimes we do have a significant amount of money in an account due to the really lumpy nature of the way that we receive that income, it kind of goes down pretty quickly.
No, I get that. But I mean, to the extent that we have apparently some, decent amounts of 5 million, it may have been possible. I was curious to see if any of that could have been spared for 12 months in order to generate a 5.95% return. And the answer is no, not at this stage. On page 19, there's a reference under further projects to Bancorp and other external agencies will be engaged to advise, recommend options for alternative revenue streams, which might be used to mitigate future rates increases after the removal of the three waters. What examples, or what is this costing us? What examples are we looking for? Or is this going to impact the investment strategy we have? And if so, when? And why aren't we doing it internally?
Well, we're not doing it internally because we don't have the necessary expertise. I mean, if we're going to be serious about making a good risk versus reward decision in non-traditional areas, I wouldn't be comfortable providing that level of advice. I think getting some external advice about what might be appropriate instruments to invest in, I think is really just sound risk management practice and sound treasury practice. There's people that their lives revolve around this kind of decision. For us, it is just it would be a minor part, and I think it's just safer for both officers and for council and for the public. It's something we've talked about. It's an issue you've raised frequently, and it is really being able to have a good discussion with the public, potentially through the LTP, about what are the kinds of things that council will be contemplating in terms of generating a meaningful level of external revenue to help offset rates. So it's a key issue we have raised in the financial strategy discussions, and really want to be able to provide sound options and advice to elected members before we take it out to the public for more formal engagement. And sorry, we didn't quite answer your question before, Councillor Blackler, and I think it was implied in the response. It was a straight oversight, not including the civic trust and the list of external items. They're certainly included in the annual report and recognised in that venue, but yeah, it should have been an item added on to those bullet points.
And just to clarify, Mr. Hope, when you talk about Bancorp being engaged to advise, because Bancorp's a treasury advisor and a debt advisor, effectively, they would be advising on the best way for funding some of the projects that people might speak to us about in the long-term plan, rather than addressing specifically some strategic projects that we might get involved in.
Yeah, that's correct. And they've also suggested that it might be better that we actually get another party to advise in some of the in terms of more in the investment space, because they feel it might create a conflict of interest, or it's not necessarily their expertise. So it's just something we're looking at the moment.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I may one final question for me. Just again, in this instance, I'm sort of trying to put myself in the position of a sceptical or dubious member of the community looking. On page 25, we have the two graphs showing debt and cover and debt and cover adjusted for NOIC on lending. And in each case, it looks as though what we're doing and what we've done, if we take the shaded areas and the red lines as the policy bands, it looks as though we're doing things in breach of or great outside our policy bands in both instances. And yet the text at the bottom suggests that the graph on the right-hand side shows that all is well and we don't have to worry about anything, or implies that. I'm oversimplifying. Can somebody explain? I mean, obviously I'm missing something. So can somebody explain to me how come the graphs don't seem to match the text?
Mr. Hope, Ms. Nichols, which one would you like to have a crack at there?
I'll have a crack at that one, thanks. Perhaps again, we're talking at slightly cross purposes. Yes, do accept in the interest in the left-hand graph that you're talking about.
Yes.
There are two relatively minor instances where we would go outside of the policy. So that's where the green line drops below the bottom red line and then appears back out of it. But then what they're saying in the right-hand one, if you adjust for essentially that NOIC is neutral, that green line stays within the two boundary lines of the whole strategy is you have an upper limit and a lower limit, and you're trying to stay in between the two. So a bit like what the Reserves Bank and inflation targets sort of sit between 1 and 3. It's not a point, it's a band, and it is addressed in the second chart.
So you see there's those two very slight mismatches around June 25 and June 27 on the left-hand graph. But that's what we often refer to as that mismatch, or the timing mismatch, and it's corrected when you take into account that it will be remediated through the week.
Look, I get that, but if somebody mailed me up afterwards and showed me these two things and said, look at the blue shaded stuff, that's our fixed rate debt, and it's greater than the red line says it should be, and it's greater than the red line says it should be in both graphs. So how do I say to them, well, no, it's only those two little bits on the left-hand side that are problematic?
I think, the simple one is there's a target band that we're aiming to stay within, and we are, apart from those two small exceptions. It's like you have an upper limit and lower limit, and you're trying to fit in between the two.
I think there's a.
No, I get it. So the two red lines are band.
Correct.
So they're not separate. Okay, right.
There's a minimum and a maximum.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Excellent. Well explained, Mr. Hope. Excellent. Or several pennies. Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. In terms of the total debt, so these graphs are basically saying out to 2031, the debt level stays at 42. So inclusive of NOIC, sorry. Is that what we're saying here?
So
Getting
what Councillor Black was asking is if you look on the right hand graph, the light grey line, which is total debt going out to June 2031, we're forecasting that the total debt is static at 42 million.
Yeah, that's certainly not the case. So I'm not sure why they've actually prepared the graph that way. Yeah, sorry. I'm sort of used to looking at these and interpreting them in a slightly different way. So yeah, I didn't pick up that reading of it.
Because I mean, I'd be really interested to, like, because it's really difficult, as we've discussed in the risk session about, you know, a change of government and stuff could change outcomes. So it'd be really nice to see underneath the debt profile what assumptions are made around what that projection includes and what it doesn't, which I don't know whether that's something we can ask Bancorp to deliver.
I think it's something we'd work on and include it in the top part of the report rather than the piece down here.
Certainly the current forecast internally is not that debt remains at $42 million out to there. So it's a graphical misrepresentation, which we'll take away and correct with them. We come back and better reflect. Councillor McKay.
Yeah, and just on your future borrowing recommendations on page 19, is that number likely to increase to what you've got written there, and take into consideration that the current Reserve Bank is 5.5? Is that allowing for, you know, why is that figure likely to increase, or is it allowing for future interest or runoffs, or why are we looking at that number?
So are you asking under the future borrowing requirements why we're looking to require to increase borrowings to 50 million? Yes. Okay, as part of the 23-24 annual plan. Yes.
If I, one reason will be the water storage that we approved this morning. I don't think, I'm not sure how much is coming from existing funds, but there'll be a need to borrow more to cover that cost.
Thank you.
Is that what we're
Mr. Hope?
looking at, Mr. Hope?
That's what's required to fund the CapEx requirements that were approved in the annual plan for 2024.
Sorry, yeah, and the other one is because we did look at making some slight adjustments to the timing of the Observatory Village facility and with the health services facility. So they've again added to the cash demand that we're going to face over the next 12 months.
But that's not
so through you, Mr. Chair, I just add, so essentially that those ones we actually make a profit on. So yeah, yes, there's debt, but there's also an investment which we make a return on.
Thank you. Are there any further questions associated with the Treasury report? If not, then could I please ask somebody to move that we accept it? Councillor Hopkins, somebody to second it. Member Kircher, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to agenda item 5.1, which is the financial summary and overview position as at 31 August. Ms. Nichols, Mr. Hope.
Yep, so this is 31 August, the first 2 months of the 24 financial year. You can see overall the deficit is sitting at 1.6 million, which is slightly better than the budgeted 1.9 million. There's a lot of detailed explanations there to explain the variance. One point to note, capital expenditure further along, that's ahead of budget. There's a few projects that have spanned from the 23 financial year carried over. And we'll be bringing a separate report to council next month about carry forwards.
Thank you. Any questions on the update? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do have a couple. Income and expenditure, the first bullet point, Ministry of Health has provided funding of 342K towards fluoridation of the Oamaru water treatment plant. Have we fluoridated the water yet? And what has been or will be the total cost, please?
No, we haven't started fluoridating yet. So that work's still underway. And we are basically, the cost is being fully reimbursed by the ministry. So we've pretty much been instructed to do it.
Right.
And
No,
they are paying for it.
that's why I was talking about external imposts. One of the sort of reason I was talking about external imposts and the risk they impose, but it's reassuring to know in this instance that they will put the total bill. If I may ask one other question on that page, Mr. Chair, there's a reference to depreciation as estimated for the 2 months at 130 over budget, I should say. This is a conservative view, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this committee and members of it have talked for a long time about the need to review depreciation and look at what, if anything, we can unfund. So I really think it's urgent. And I'm looking for a time frame. It should be built into the LTP preparations, but I also believe we should be doing it this year. Is it going to come before PAR this year?
Certainly is. Yeah, it's a critical decision in relation to the long-term plan. So we're just working through the process of finalising the impact of the latest revaluation, because we really want to come back to you with the most up-to-date figures. So we're really clear on the impacts of the items that are going to be raised.
One more question on the next page. I don't want to drill down too much into the weeds, but I'm just curious to see the finance costs showing an expenditure 470 as against 300, and also insurance 343 versus 249. I thought we'd made certain decisions about insurance that meant that there shouldn't have been any budget increases in that area, and I'm just curious to know why equally the finance costs are 170 more than we budgeted.
So I'll hand over to Mr. Hope, but I suspect the insurance is probably a timing issue with a flat line. No, I'll hand over.
No, look, yeah, we certainly did raise the insurance issue, but the decision, the matters we brought forward to council or the committee, I can't really remember which, it was to really try and mitigate the size of the increase. We would have to uninsure so much to get it back to zero, because pretty much the standard increase was around 20%, and next year will be something similar. Sorry, what was the second?
The finance costs 470 plus 300.
Sorry, we'll need to do a wee bit of digging on that one. It's probably more that work out what the 300 number was based on.
So just a couple of other things. I'm assuming too the titles of April 2023 should be August 2023. Well, there's a couple of lines here, and just a follow-up question. So with regard to that insurance, and I can remember was presented to council when we looked at ways to mitigate increased premiums, we'd expect that trend to continue throughout the year.
It won't get worse, because we recognise, we do pay the premiums in a lump sum, so it's really sort of stating. No, that should pretty much. No, it will be worse. Sorry.
Yeah,
because we've got over $1 million in premiums per year. So
yeah. So the relative spend above budget will continue to grow throughout the year for that, and that's just so that's just a reflection of the increased premium costs that we're seeing. Yep. Councillor McCone, did you have a question?
So the last bullet point on the bottom of page 30, I presume the charges and the costs are pretty much negating themselves off the page, but could you just elaborate on what the LGFA borrowings that have been assessed earlier than expected and what impact they've had and why?
Yeah, that was, sorry, the reason that the LGFA costs were gone down early was really a recasting of the likely outflows on the major capital projects, particularly I think the two big ones were the water main renewals out in Western and the project in Kakanui that originally it was thought that they would be over a couple of year period, but both are the contractors came back with timetables that were significantly less disruptive for the same price. So we should made the decision to go with those, but that did mean that we were going to have outflows earlier than we expected, and we needed to adjust the borrowing to reflect that.
Further questions? Councillor McKay.
Again, sorry. So on the bottom of page 31, it says capital expenditure for the whole year was 23.5, and if we carry on doing what we're doing, it might hit 30 mil. Is there a way we can keep our finger on that pretty tightly? Because I don't think we can afford to go anything over that number that we've already got there.
Yes, we'll certainly keep a very close eye on that, and make that a key aspect of both the more detailed quarterly reports and the monthly reports. And Ms. Nichols has something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we bring the carry forward report next month, you'll get a good indication of where we're sitting, what's carrying over from 23, and then there may be an opportunity to cull back projects and really scrutinise what's going in for the 24 financial year, what we can afford.
So the intent is very much to stick as close as possible to the 23.5. Or less. Thank you. And just one point of clarification that I had was on page 32 when we talk about property, plant and equipment valuations, and there's the note there under note 1 that this is also to include the roading revaluation. Is that the lion's share of the 67 million? And waters.
Yeah, I think the roading valuation we've booked 45 at the moment. It's still in draft. We're still working out the 30 June results, and obviously they haven't been audited, so those figures will change slightly.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for either Amanda or Paul with regard to this? No, if not, then could I please ask somebody to move that we accept the financial update? Councillor Blackler seconded.
Councillor Ryan, I'm sure.
Councillor Ryan, I am sure. And so I now ask all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Then that motion is carried. So now I move on, and because we agreed before to accept the publicly excluded minutes as new item 3.2, we no longer need agenda items 6, 7, 8 and 9, and so I therefore declare the meeting closed at 5 minutes to 2. Thank you.